An 8-year-old boy with burned hands carried his unconscious 4-year-old sister 3 miles to the hospital. When doctors asked how he got the burns, the recording he hid in his sister's teddy bear made the entire ER staff call 911 immediately. The first gray fingers of dawn crept through the grimy window of the Hartwell flat, casting long shadows across the threadbare carpet that had seen better days decades ago. In the smaller of the 2 bedrooms, 8-year-old Thomas Hartwell, Tommy to everyone who bothered to know his name, lay perfectly still on his narrow mattress, listening, not to an alarm clock, for they had never owned one that worked, but to the familiar symphony of sounds that dictated the rhythm of his young life. The front door creaked open downstairs. Heavy, unsteady footsteps stumbled against the walls of the narrow staircase leading to their second-floor flat. A bottle clinked against the banister, followed by a string of slurred curses that would make the dock workers down at Millbrook Harbor blush. Frank Hartwell was home from another night drowning his sorrows at the Lamb and Flag, the only pub in town that still served him despite his mounting tab and increasingly volatile behavior. Tommy's eyes remained closed, but every muscle in his small frame tensed as he counted the footsteps. 12 steps to the landing. Frank stumbled on the 9th, as he always did, catching himself against the wall with a thud that vibrated through the thin floors. The boy's mind automatically calculated 3 bottles tonight, judging by the rhythm of his father's gait. 3 bottles meant Frank would collapse onto the sofa and sleep until noon, giving Tommy and Lucy precious hours of peace. Satisfied that immediate danger had passed, Tommy allowed himself to breathe normally again. He slipped from beneath his thin blanket, a faded Manchester United cover his mother had bought him 3 Christmases ago, back when she still pretended to care, and padded silently across the cold linoleum floor to the adjacent bed where his 4-year-old sister Lucy slept. She lay curled in a tight ball, her golden hair spread across a pillow that had long since lost its shape, clutching Mr. Buttons against her chest. The teddy bear had once been brown, but years of love and countless washes had faded him to a mottled gray. One of his button eyes hung by a single thread, giving him a perpetually winking expression that Lucy found endlessly amusing. To the outside world, Mr. Buttons appeared to be nothing more than a well-loved toy. Only Tommy knew the secret hidden within the bear's cotton stuffing. "Lucy," Tommy whispered, gently shaking her shoulder. "Time to wake up, sunshine." The little girl's eyes fluttered open, immediately alert despite the early hour. Children who lived in houses like theirs learned quickly to wake without grogginess, to assess danger before fully consciousness returned. Her pale blue eyes, so much like their mother's had been, darted toward the door, then back to Tommy's face, reading the all clear in his expression. "Is he sleeping?" she asked in a voice barely above a breath. "Fast asleep on the sofa," Tommy confirmed, helping her sit up. "We have time for breakfast and maybe even some reading before he wakes up." Lucy nodded solemnly, understanding the unspoken rules that governed their existence. Quiet mornings meant safety. Quiet mornings meant they could pretend, just for a few hours, that they were normal children in a normal home with normal problems like homework and chores and what to watch on television. Tommy helped his sister dress in yesterday's clothes, a pink jumper with a small hole near the left elbow and black leggings that were slightly too short, revealing her pale ankles above scuffed trainers. He finger-combed her hair into 2 uneven pigtails, a skill he had taught himself through necessity rather than choice. Their mother, Sharon, had walked out on a Tuesday morning 2 years and 4 months ago, claiming she was going to the shops for milk. She had never returned, leaving behind only a note scrawled on the back of an overdue electricity bill. "I can't do this anymore. They're better off without me." Tommy had hidden that note in the same secret place where he kept his most precious possessions, a collection that had grown to include the mobile phone he had found in a rubbish bin behind the fish and chip shop 6 months ago. The phone was ancient by modern standards, with a cracked screen and a battery that barely held a charge, but it had one crucial feature that made it invaluable: a working recording function. While Lucy played quietly, With Mr. Buttons on her bed, Tommy retrieved the phone from its hiding place beneath a loose floorboard near the window. The device was wrapped in a torn tea towel to muffle any sounds it might make. He checked the battery, 37% remaining, and scrolled through the files he had accumulated over the past months. 17 recordings in total, each one a testament to the hell their father created with increasing frequency. The first recording had been accidental. Tommy had been trying to figure out how the phone worked when Frank had come home one evening in a particularly foul mood. The boy had forgotten to stop the recording as he witnessed his father hurl a ceramic mug at the wall, screaming about ungrateful children and worthless mouths to feed. When Tommy later discovered the audio file, he had been struck by a revelation. Here was proof. Here was evidence that no one could dismiss or explain away. From that moment forward, Tommy had begun documenting their reality with the methodical precision of a detective. He recorded Frank's ranting threats, the sound of furniture being overturned, the crash of broken bottles, and most damning of all, his father's voice promising consequences if the children ever dared to tell anyone about what happened behind their closed door. "And no one will believe you anyway," Frank's voice slurred from one particularly clear recording. "Who's going to take the word of a lying little brat over his own father? You tell anyone about our business, Tommy boy, and I'll make sure. You and your sister disappear somewhere, no one will ever find you." The threat had been made 3 weeks ago, after Tommy had dared to ask a teacher about the bruise on his wrist. Mr. Patterson had noticed the marks during PE and asked gentle questions that Tommy had deflected with practiced lies about falling off his bicycle. But Frank had somehow learned about the conversation, perhaps through one of his drinking companions whose children attended the same school, and the consequences had been swift and terrifying. Tommy powered off the phone and wrapped it carefully before returning it to its hiding place. The evidence was growing, but he had no idea what to do with it. Who would believe an 8-year-old boy? Who would care enough to listen? The few adults in their orbit, teachers, neighbors, the clerk at the corner shop, all seemed to exist in a different world where children were fed regular meals and tucked into bed with stories instead of threats. Tommy, Lucy's small voice pulled him from his dark thoughts. "I'm hungry." "Right then," he said, forcing brightness into his voice. "Let's see what we can find for breakfast, shall we?" The kitchen was a testament to neglect and poverty. The refrigerator hummed loudly, its motor struggling to maintain cool temperatures despite having very little inside to keep fresh. Tommy opened the door and surveyed their options. A carton of milk that was 2 days past its expiration date but still smelled acceptable. 3 slices of bread growing slightly stale. A jar of strawberry jam with only a thin layer remaining. At the bottom, and a single egg that rattled ominously when he picked it up. He made quick calculations in his head. Frank received his unemployment benefit tomorrow, which meant there might be money for proper shopping if he didn't spend it all at the pub first. Until then, they would need to make do with what they had. Tommy had become expert at stretching. Meager resources, a skill no child should need to master. "How about toast with jam?" he suggested to Lucy, who had climbed onto one of the 2 mismatched chairs at their small table. "And I'll make you a proper cup of tea, just like Mum used to." The mention of their mother was a calculated risk. Sometimes it made Lucy smile with happy memories. Other times it reduced her to tears that took hours to stop. Today, thankfully, it earned him a small smile that lit up her entire face. "With extra sugar?" she asked hopefully. "With extra sugar," Tommy confirmed, though he knew they were down to their last few spoonfuls. As he prepared their simple meal, Tommy found himself falling into the familiar rhythm of caring for his sister. He had been her primary caretaker. Since Sharon left, learning through trial and error how to change nappies, prepare bottles, and later, how to coax her to eat vegetables and help her with the alphabet. The responsibility had aged him beyond his years, carving lines of worry around his eyes that belonged on the face of someone decades older. The bread went into their temperamental toaster, a wedding gift to Frank and Sharon 12 years ago that now required percussive maintenance to function properly. Tommy tapped it twice on the left side, once on the right, and whispered a small prayer to whatever gods looked after forgotten children in forgotten places. The heating elements glowed red, and soon the smell of toasting bread filled the small kitchen, temporarily masking the underlying odors of damp and desperation that permeated their flat. While they waited, Tommy poured milk into Lucy's favorite mug, a chipped ceramic cup decorated with cartoon rabbits that she had received on her 3rd birthday. He added 2 spoonfuls of sugar and stirred carefully, listening for any sounds from the living room that might indicate Frank was stirring. The silence held, broken only by the steady tick of the wall clock and the distant rumble of early morning traffic on the main road that led to the industrial estates where most of Dio Millbrook's remaining jobs could be found. "Tell me about the castle again," Lucy said, swinging her legs from her chair. "The one with the princess and the dragon." Tommy smiled genuinely for the first time that morning. The story of Princess Lucy and her brave knight Tommy was an ongoing saga he had been crafting for months, a fantasy world where good always triumphed over evil and little girls were protected by those who loved them. In their imaginary kingdom, dragons could be defeated with courage and kindness, and every story ended with everyone safe and happy in a castle filled with warmth and laughter. "Well," Tommy began, settling into the familiar cadence of storytelling. "Princess Lucy was very clever, you see. She had discovered that the dragon wasn't really evil at all. He was just very sad and lonely. So instead of fighting him, she decided to befriend him." The toast popped up, slightly darker than ideal but perfectly edible. Tommy spread the jam thinly across both pieces, making sure Lucy received the larger portion. He cut her toast into triangles. She refused to eat it any other way, and placed it before her with the ceremonial flourish of a waiter in a fancy restaurant. "So the princess and the dragon became friends?" Lucy asked between careful bites. "The very best of friends," Tommy confirmed. "And the dragon promised to protect the princess and her brother from anyone who might try to hurt them. He was very fierce when he needed to be, but gentle as a lamb with those he loved." Lucy nodded approvingly. Jam smeared across her cheek in a sticky purple crescent. Tommy reached over with a damp cloth and wiped it away, marveling at how such simple moments could feel so precious when they were stolen from the chaos that surrounded them. They ate in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Tommy's mind was already working ahead to the challenges the day would bring. Frank would wake eventually, probably around noon if his pattern held. He would be hungover and irritable, looking for someone to blame for the pounding in his head and the bitter taste of failure in his mouth. Tommy had learned to recognize the signs and had developed strategies for keeping Lucy out of harm's way during these dangerous hours. After breakfast, Tommy helped Lucy wash her face and hands in the kitchen sink. Their bathroom taps had been running rusty water for a week, another problem Frank couldn't be bothered to address. He then settled her at the table with a collection of crayons and paper he had salvaged from the school's rubbish bin, carefully smoothing out the wrinkles so she would have clean surfaces to draw on. "What shall I draw today?" Lucy asked. Selecting a red crayon from the small collection. "How about our castle?" Tommy suggested. "The one where Princess Lucy lives with all her friends." "With the dragon?" "Especially with the dragon." As Lucy bent over her paper, tongue poking out in concentration, Tommy allowed himself a moment to study her face. She was still so young, still possessed of that innocent faith that the world was fundamentally good and that adults would protect her from harm. Tommy was determined to preserve that innocence for as long as possible, even if it meant sacrificing his own childhood in the process. The sound of movement from the living room froze both children in place. Heavy breathing, the creak of sofa springs, a muttered curse. Frank was stirring earlier than usual, which could mean any number of things, none of them good. Tommy's mind immediately shifted into protective mode, calculating distances to hiding places and escape routes. "Lucy," he whispered urgently, "let's take Mr. Buttons and go to the hiding spot. Now!" Without question or complaint, Lucy scooped up her teddy bear and slipped from her chair. The hiding spot was a narrow space behind the water heater in the bathroom cupboard that Tommy had discovered months ago. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but completely hidden from view and muffled most sounds from the outside world. Lucy could stay there for hours if necessary, with Mr. Buttons for company and the small torch Tommy had placed there for emergencies. The living room erupted in a string of profanity that would have made the roughest sailors in Portsmouth cover their ears. Frank was awake, and from the sound of his voice, he was in the grip of one of his black moods, the dangerous times when his anger needed a target, and his children were the most convenient options available. Tommy quickly cleared away the breakfast dishes, erasing any evidence that might provoke his father's wrath. Crumbs were swept away, the jam jar returned to its proper place, the butter dish washed and dried. Every surface was wiped clean, every item returned to its designated position. Frank had very specific ideas about how his home should be maintained, and any deviation from his unspoken rules could result in consequences that lasted for days. "Tommy!" Frank's voice bellowed from the living room, followed by the crash of something heavy hitting the floor. "Get in here now!" Tommy closed his eyes and took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever was to come. He had learned through painful experience that hesitation only made things worse. Frank's anger was like a storm. It would rage regardless of what Tommy did or didn't do, but swift compliance sometimes shortened its duration. "Coming, Day!" Tommy called back, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his stomach. He paused at the bathroom door and whispered through the cupboard, "Stay quiet, sunshine. I'll come get you when it's safe." From inside the hiding place came the faintest whisper in return. "Be careful, Tommy." The living room was a disaster. Frank had clearly swept everything from the coffee table in a fit of rage, sending empty bottles, overflowing ashtrays, and old newspapers cascading onto the floor. He stood in the center of the chaos, swaying slightly, his face flushed with anger and the lingering effects of alcohol. His work clothes from yesterday, a stained shirt and trousers that had seen better days, hung loosely on his increasingly gaunt frame. Frank had been a handsome man once, back when Sharon first fell for his easy smile and promises of a better life. Now he looked like a scarecrow someone had forgotten to take down after harvest. "Oh, look at this mess," Frank snarled, gesturing wildly at the scattered debris. "Look at the state of this place. No wonder your mother ran off. Who wants to live in a pig pen with a bunch of worthless—" He stopped himself, before completing the sentence but Tommy could fill in the blanks. Frank's opinions about his children were well documented in the recordings hidden beneath the floorboard in the bedroom. "I'll clean it up, Day," Tommy said quietly, already moving to collect the scattered items. "Sorry about the mess." It was always easier to apologize, even when he had done nothing wrong. Frank needed to hear contrition, needed to feel that his authority was acknowledged and respected. The truth, that Frank himself had created the mess in his drunken rage, was irrelevant. What mattered was maintaining the delicate balance that kept their household from exploding into complete chaos. "You're damn right you'll clean it," Frank muttered, dropping back onto the sofa with a grunt of pain. "And when you're done with that, you can figure out what we're having. For dinner, I'm not spending another night eating beans from a tin like some common vagrant." Tommy continued cleaning as his father ranted about the unfairness of his situation. Frank had been unemployed for 8 months now, ever since the textile mill had laid off its remaining workers and closed its doors permanently. The building still stood on the edge of town like a tombstone, its broken windows reflecting the grey sky that seemed to perpetually hang over Millbrook like a shroud. "I had interviews lined up," Frank continued, his voice taking on the self-pitying tone that Tommy recognized as particularly dangerous. 3 different companies wanted to see me. But do you think any of them called back? Do you think any of them had the courtesy to give a working man a straight answer? The truth, which Tommy had overheard during one of Frank's phone calls to his drinking companion Big Jim, was that Frank had shown up drunk to 2 of the interviews and never appeared for the 3rd. But pointing out this discrepancy would only redirect Frank's anger toward a more personal target. As Tommy worked, carefully placing each item back in its proper location, he found himself thinking about the recordings hidden in his bedroom. Each audio file was a piece of evidence, a fragment of truth that contradicted the story Frank told the outside world. To his drinking companions, Frank was a devoted father struggling to raise 2 children alone after being abandoned by their selfish mother. To the unemployment office, he was a dedicated worker victimized by economic circumstances beyond his control. To the teachers and social workers who occasionally asked questions, he was a man doing his best in difficult circumstances. Only Tommy and Lucy knew the real Frank Hartwell, the man who screamed threats in the middle of the night, who broke furniture when his football team lost, who promised terrible consequences for imagined slights and perceived disrespect. The man who had made it clear that his children's safety depended on maintaining his fiction of respectability. "Where's your sister?" Frank asked suddenly, his bloodshot eyes scanning the room, as if Lucy might be hiding behind the thin curtains or under the single armchair. "Having a nap," Tommy replied quickly. She was tired after breakfast. It was a believable lie. Lucy often napped during the day, a habit Tommy had encouraged because it kept her out of Frank's sight during his most unpredictable hours. Frank grunted acceptance of this explanation and turned his attention back to the television, which was displaying a game show with the sound turned down low. Tommy finished cleaning and retreated to the kitchen, where he began planning their evening meal with the mathematical precision of a quartermaster managing siege rations. They had enough ingredients for a basic pasta dish if he supplemented, the sauce with tinned tomatoes and added extra onion to create the illusion of substance. It wouldn't be particularly nutritious or filling, but it would satisfy Frank's expectation of a proper dinner without exceeding their limited budget. As he worked, Tommy's mind wandered to thoughts of escape. He had elaborate fantasies about taking Lucy away from Millbrook, finding their way to a place where children were safe and loved and fed regular meals. In his daydreams, they lived in a cottage by the sea where Lucy could play on sandy beaches, while Tommy attended a school where teachers encouraged his love of reading instead of asking uncomfortable questions about bruises and torn clothing. But reality always intruded on these fantasies. Tommy had no money, no transportation, and nowhere to go. Even if he could somehow manage to get Lucy away from Frank, where would they live? How would they eat? An 8-year-old boy and his 4-year-old sister wouldn't last a week on their own, and any attempt to seek help from authorities would likely result in their separation. Foster care might be better than their current situation, but it would mean losing each other. And Lucy was the only thing in the world Tommy truly cared about protecting. The sound of Frank's snoring from the living room signaled that he had fallen back asleep, giving Tommy permission to retrieve Lucy from her hiding place. He found her exactly where he had left her, curled up in the narrow space behind the water heater with Mr. Buttons clutched against her chest. She looked so small in the cramped space, so vulnerable and trusting. "Is it safe now?" she whispered as Tommy helped her crawl out. "He's sleeping again," Tommy confirmed. "We can play in the bedroom for a while." They spent the next few hours engaged in quiet activities that wouldn't disturb Frank's rest. Lucy continued working on her drawing of their imaginary castle, adding towers and flags and a large, friendly dragon with a smiling face. Tommy read to her from a collection of library books he had borrowed using a card registered under Sharon's name. The librarian had never bothered to verify that the pale, serious boy checking out advanced readers was actually an adult patron. As afternoon faded toward evening, Tommy began preparing dinner while Lucy helped by setting the table with their mismatched plates and bent cutlery. The pasta boiled in their only large pot, while Tommy stretched the tomato sauce with every enhancement he could find. Dried herbs from packets that were months past their expiration date. A splash of the sour wine Frank kept for cooking. Even a bit of brown sugar to mask the metallic taste of the cheap tinned tomatoes. Frank emerged from his marathon sleep just as Tommy was draining the pasta, drawn by the smell of food like a bear emerging from hibernation. His mood seemed improved by rest and the prospect of a hot meal, and for a few precious minutes, their kitchen almost resembled a normal family gathering. "Smells good," Frank admitted grudgingly, settling into his chair at the head of their small table. "What is it?" "Pasta with tomato sauce," Tommy replied, serving generous portions onto each plate. "And there's bread to go with it." "No meat." "I thought I might pick up some mince tomorrow when you get your benefit," Tommy said carefully. "Make a proper bolognese for Sunday dinner." Frank grunted approval of this plan, and they ate in relative peace. Lucy chattered quietly about her drawing, describing each tower and battlement of her castle with the enthusiasm of an architect unveiling plans for a cathedral. Frank even smiled once when she explained that the dragon's job was to keep all the bad people away from the princess and her family. But Tommy could see the warning signs building beneath his father's improved mood. Frank's jaw muscles were tense, his grip on his fork tighter than necessary. He kept glancing toward the window as if expecting someone to appear, and his leg bounced restlessly under the table. These were all indicators that Frank's temporary calm was giving way to the agitation that preceded his worst episodes. After dinner, Tommy quickly washed the dishes while Frank retreated to the living room with the bottle of cooking wine. The television volume increased steadily as Frank channel surfed through programs that failed to hold his increasingly scattered attention. Tommy recognized the pattern. Within an hour, Frank would be looking for reasons to pick a fight, hunting for grievances, real or imagined, that justified his need to rage against the unfairness of his existence. Tommy helped Lucy with her bedtime routine earlier than usual, brushing her teeth with the last squeeze drops from a nearly empty tube of toothpaste and combing the tangles from her fine hair. He read her an extra story, a tale about brave mice who outwitted the cats that threatened their peaceful village, and tucked her into bed with Mr. Buttons nestled against her cheek. "Will you sing the song?" Lucy asked, her voice already drowsy with approaching sleep. Tommy smiled and began humming the lullaby their mother used to sing before her love turned to resentment and her nurturing transformed into neglect. It was a simple melody, something Sharon had probably learned from her own mother, passed down through generations of women who understood that sometimes a gentle voice was the only protection they could offer their children. As Lucy's breathing deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep, Tommy remained sitting on the edge of her bed, watching over her like a guardian angel with tired eyes and worried hands. In the living room, Frank's voice was growing louder, arguing with someone on the television who couldn't argue back. Soon he would remember that he had children who could serve as more satisfying targets for his frustration. Tommy reached under his mattress and checked that the mobile phone was fully charged and easily accessible. Tonight felt different somehow, more volatile, more dangerous. Frank's earlier calmness had been too perfect, too controlled. It felt like the stillness before a thunderstorm, when the very air seemed to vibrate with potential energy waiting to be released. The clock on their bedroom wall ticked toward 8 o'clock, and with each passing minute, Tommy could feel the atmosphere in their small flat growing more charged with tension. Frank's voice carried clearly through the thin walls, no longer directed at the television, but muttering to himself in the rambling, circular patterns of a man whose thoughts were becoming increasingly disconnected from reality. Tommy positioned himself between Lucy's bed and the door, ready to wake her and implement their emergency protocols if necessary. Mr. Buttons sat on the bedside table, innocent and unassuming, containing within his cotton stuffing the evidence that might someday free them from this nightmare, if Tommy could ever find the courage to share it with someone who had the power to help. Outside their window, the industrial landscape of Millbrook settled into another gray evening, factory smokestacks and housing estates blending into shadows as the sun disappeared behind layers of perpetual cloud. In homes throughout the town, families were gathering for evening meals and television programs. Children were being tucked into bed with kisses and promises of better days ahead. But in the Hartwell flat above the empty shop on Coronation Street, an 8-year-old boy sat sentinel over his sleeping sister, listening to the growing storm in the next room and preparing himself for whatever the night might bring. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his narrow shoulders like a physical burden, but Tommy bore it willingly. Lucy needed him to be strong, to be brave, to be the protection their parents had failed to provide. In the distance, Church bells chimed the hour, their bronze voices carrying across the sleeping town like a prayer for the forgotten and the lost. Tommy closed his eyes and made his own silent prayer, not for rescue, which seemed impossible, but for the strength to keep Lucy safe through another night in their precarious existence. The storm was coming. Tommy could feel it building in the electric tension that filled their small flat, in the dangerous edge to Frank's muttered complaints, in the way the very walls seemed to hold their breath in anticipation. All he could do was wait, and watch and hope that when morning came, they would both still be safe in their shared bed, planning another day of small survivals and quiet victories against the chaos that surrounded them. But deep in his heart, where children store their most desperate fears and secret knowledge, Tommy sensed that tonight would be different. Tonight, the careful balance he had maintained for so long would finally shatter, and nothing would ever be the same again. The explosion came without warning. Tommy had been dozing fitfully in the chair beside Lucy's bed when the crash of shattering glass jolted him fully awake. The sound reverberated through their thin walls like a gunshot, followed immediately by Frank's voice roaring with a fury that made Tommy's blood freeze in his veins. Worthless! Absolutely worthless! Another crash. This time it sounded like the ceramic lamp their mother had bought at a car boot sale years ago, the one with the faded roses that Lucy had always admired. Tommy's heart hammered against his ribs as he calculated the danger. Frank's voice carried a different quality tonight, something beyond his usual drunken rage. This was the sound of a man whose last thread of control had finally snapped. Lucy stirred in her bed, her small face creasing with worry even in sleep. Tommy gently placed his hand on her shoulder, ready to wake her if they needed to implement their emergency escape plan. Through the bedroom wall, he could hear Frank stumbling around the living room, his movements destructive and purposeless. For 23 years I worked at that mill. Frank's voice carried clearly through the flat. 23 years, and for what? So some corporate bastards could shut us down and move the jobs to Bangladesh, so I could sit here rotting away like a piece of rubbish while my own children look at me like I'm some kind of monster. Tommy closed his eyes, recognizing the familiar pattern of Frank's self-pity transforming into blame. It always followed the same progression. First, the anger at external forces, the economy, the government, the companies that had failed, him. Then the gradual focus inward until his rage found its inevitable target in his own family. The bedroom door burst open without warning. Frank stood swaying in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by the harsh fluorescent light from the hallway. Even in the darkness, Tommy could see that his father had deteriorated further since dinner time. His shirt hung open, revealing the pale, sunken chest of a man who had forgotten how to take care of himself. His hair stuck up at odd angles, and there was something wild in his eyes that made Tommy's stomach clench with fear. Where is she?" Frank demanded, his words slightly slurred but perfectly understandable. "She's sleeping, Da," Tommy whispered, positioning himself more firmly between Frank and Lucy's bed. "Please don't wake her. She's had a long day." "Don't tell me what to do in my own house," Frank snarled, taking a step into the room. The smell of wine and stale sweat rolled off him in waves. "I want to talk to both my children. I want to explain some things about how the world really works." Tommy had heard these explanations before. They usually involved long, rambling speeches about betrayal and disappointment, punctuated by increasingly aggressive questions about loyalty and respect. Frank would work himself into a frenzy, talking about all the ways he had been wronged, until his need for validation became a demand for agreement that neither child could safely provide. "She's only 4, Da," Tommy said carefully. "Maybe in the morning when she's had her breakfast and—" "Now!" Frank roared, and Lucy jerked awake with a small cry of terror. The sound of his sister's fear acted like a physical blow to Tommy's chest. Lucy sat up in bed, clutching Mr. Buttons against her chest, her wide blue eyes darting between Tommy and the looming figure of their father. Her lower lip began to tremble, and Tommy could see her struggling not to cry, a skill she had learned far too young. "It's all right, sunshine," Tommy said softly, never taking his eyes off Frank. Everything's going to be all right. But even as he spoke the words, Tommy knew they were a lie. Frank's posture, the set of his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, all of it signaled that tonight would be different. Tonight, their careful system of avoidance and appeasement would not be enough. "Look at her," Frank said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Look at how she looks at me, like I'm some kind of villain from one of your stupid stories. Well, let me tell you something. Little girl, I'm not the villain here. I'm the one who kept a roof over your heads when your precious mother decided she had better things to do than be a parent." Lucy shrank further back into her bed, and Tommy could see her beginning to hyperventilate. He had seen this before during Frank's worst episodes. His sister's small body would begin to shake, and she would struggle to breathe until sometimes she fainted from sheer terror. Tommy moved closer to her bed, placing himself more directly between Lucy and their father. "Da, please," Tommy said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his throat. "Let her go back to sleep. If you want to talk to someone, talk to me. I'm listening." Frank's bloodshot eyes fixed on Tommy with laser intensity. "Oh, you're listening, are you? That's rich. You think I don't know what goes on in this house? You think I don't see the way you look at me, the way you whisper with your sister when you think I can't hear?" Tommy's blood turned to ice. Had Frank somehow discovered the recordings? Had he found the mobile phone hidden beneath the floorboard? Tommy's mind raced through possibilities, trying to remember if he had been careless, if he had left, any evidence of his secret documentation. "I don't know what you mean, Da," Tommy said truthfully. "We don't whisper about anything." "Liar!" Frank exploded, taking another step into the room. "You're just like your mother, sneaky, dishonest, always plotting behind my back. Well, I've had enough of it. Tonight, we're going to have some honesty in this house. Tonight, you're both going to learn some respect." Lucy began to cry, small, hiccuping sobs that she tried to muffle against Mr. Button's. The sound seemed to enrage Frank further, as if her tears were a personal insult to his authority. "Stop that sniveling," he commanded. "I haven't even done anything to you yet. And you're already carrying on like some kind of drama queen. Just like your mother, always the victim, never taking responsibility for anything." "She's scared," Tommy said, his own fear beginning to transform into something harder and more dangerous. "She's just a little girl, and you're scaring her." The words were out before Tommy could stop them, and he immediately realized his mistake. Frank's face darkened with fury, and Tommy saw his father's hand clench into a fist. "I'm scaring her," Frank repeated, his voice deadly quiet. "When I'm scaring her, let me tell you what's scary, boy. What's scary is having ungrateful children who think they're better than their own father. What's scary is working your whole life to provide for a family that treats you like dirt." Frank began to pace in the small space beside Lucy's bed, his movements becoming more agitated with each word. Tommy tracked his father's position carefully, ready to move if Frank got too close to Lucy. "I came home tonight," Frank continued, his voice rising again. "And do you know what I found? I found a letter. A letter from the council saying we're behind on rent. 3 months behind, Tommy. 3 months. And not one word from either of you about helping out, about maybe getting jobs, about contributing something to this household. Besides complaints and dirty dishes." Tommy felt a surge of desperate confusion. He had never seen any letter from the council, and even if he had, what could an 8-year-old boy possibly do about rent money? But pointing out these logical flaws would only make Frank angrier. Instead, Tommy tried to focus on de-escalation. "Well, I'm sorry, Da," he said quietly. "I didn't know about the letter. Maybe tomorrow we can figure out—" "Tomorrow?" Frank laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "There might not be a tomorrow for any of us if we get evicted, and whose fault will that be? Mine, I suppose. Everything's always my fault, isn't it?" Lucy's crying intensified, and she began rocking back and forth with Mr. Buttons. clutched against her chest. The sight of his sister's distress finally pushed Tommy past the point of caution. "Leave her alone," he said, stepping directly in front of Lucy's bed. "Oh, she hasn't done anything wrong. If you're angry about the rent, be angry at me. But leave Lucy out of it." Frank stopped pacing and stared at Tommy with an expression of genuine surprise. In all their years of careful avoidance and strategic submission, Tommy had never directly challenged his father's authority. The boy's defiance seemed to catch Frank off guard, but only for a moment. "Oh, I see," Frank said slowly, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "The little knight wants to protect his princess, does he? How noble, how touching. Well, let me tell you something about knights, Tommy. They don't live very long." Frank lunged forward with surprising speed for someone so intoxicated. Tommy barely had time to brace himself before his father's hand struck him across the face with enough force to send him stumbling backward. The taste of blood filled his mouth, and his ear rang from the impact. Lucy screamed, a high, piercing sound that seemed to fill the entire flat. The sound of her terror acted like gasoline on the fire of Frank's rage. He whirled toward the bed where Lucy cowered, his face twisted with fury. "Shut up!" he roared. "Shut up right now, or I'll give you something to really scream about." But Lucy was beyond hearing threats or commands. Her small body shook with sobs, and she gasped for breath between wails of pure terror. Tommy could see that she was approaching one of her panic attacks, the episodes that sometimes left her unconscious from hyperventilation. Tommy launched himself between Frank and the bed, wrapping his arms around his father's waist in a desperate attempt to stop his advance toward Lucy. "Please, Da," he begged. "Please stop. She's just scared. She'll be quiet if you just give her a minute to calm down." Frank looked down at the boy clinging to him with an expression of absolute disgust. "Get off me," he snarled, trying to shake Tommy loose. "Or get your hands off me right now." But Tommy held on with the desperation of someone who knew that letting go meant catastrophe for the person he loved most in the world. Frank's attempts to dislodge him became more violent, and soon they were struggling in earnest, Frank trying to reach Lucy while Tommy fought to prevent him. In the chaos of their struggle, neither of them noticed the pot of water that had been sitting on the small electric ring in the corner of the bedroom. Water Frank had been heating to make instant coffee before his rage overtook him. The portable cooking unit was something he had moved into the bedroom weeks ago during one of his paranoid episodes, convinced that someone was tampering with the kitchen appliances. Frank finally managed to break free from Tommy's grip, sending the boy sprawling across the floor. But his wild movements had brought him too close to the makeshift cooking area. His elbow caught the handle of the pot, sending it flying through the air in a wide arc. Time seemed to slow as Tommy watched the boiling water leave the pot in a glittering cascade. His mind calculated trajectories with mathematical precision, realizing with horror that the scalding liquid was heading directly toward Lucy's bed. Without conscious thought, Tommy threw himself upward, his small body intercepting the burning water meant for his sister. The pain was beyond anything Tommy had ever experienced. The boiling water struck his outstretched hands and forearms like liquid fire, instantly raising blisters and turning his pale skin an angry red. He screamed, a sound of pure agony that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. But even as Tommy absorbed the worst of the scalding water, some of it splashed beyond his protective reach. Droplets caught Lucy on her left shoulder and arm, and the shock of the burning pain combined with her already heightened terror proved too much for her small system. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed onto her pillow, unconscious. Frank stood frozen in the center of the room, staring at the devastation he had caused. The pot lay on its side near the wall, steam still rising from the remaining water. Tommy knelt on the floor, cradling his burned hands against his chest, tears of pain streaming down his face. Lucy lay motionless on her bed, Mr. Buttons fallen beside her, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Oh God," Frank whispered, his face pale with shock. "Oh God, what have I done? For a moment, sobriety seemed to cut through his drunken haze as the reality of the situation crashed over him. He looked from Tommy's burned hands to Lucy's unconscious form, and Tommy could see genuine horror in his father's eyes. "I didn't mean—" Frank started, then stopped. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, fear, guilt, and finally, self-preservation. "This isn't my fault," he said, his voice growing stronger. "You grabbed me. You made me knock over the pot. This is your fault, Tommy. You did this to your sister." Tommy stared at his father through a haze of pain, unable to believe what he was hearing. Even now, faced with the evidence of what his rage had accomplished, Frank was rewriting history to protect himself from responsibility. "You have to help her," Tommy managed to gasp through gritted teeth. "She needs a doctor. She needs help." Frank looked at Lucy's still form, and Tommy could see him calculating consequences. A trip to the hospital would mean questions, investigations, possible involvement from social services. Frank's carefully maintained fiction of respectability would crumble under scrutiny. "She's fine," Frank said, but his voice lacked conviction. "She just fainted. She'll wake up in a few minutes." "Look at her," Tommy cried, struggling to his feet despite the agony in his hands. "Look at her breathing. Something's wrong." But Frank was already backing toward the door, his face set in the stubborn expression Tommy knew meant his father had made a decision that couldn't be changed by logic or pleading. "Clean this up," Frank ordered, his voice regaining some of its earlier authority. "Get some ice on your hands and clean up this mess, and keep your sister quiet. I don't want to hear another sound from either of you tonight. Please." "Not another word," Frank shouted. "I'm going out. When I come back, I want this room cleaned up and both of you in bed sleeping like normal children. And if anyone asks about this, anyone at all, you tell them you were playing with hot water and had an accident. Do you understand me?" Tommy stared at his father in disbelief. "You're leaving? You're just going to leave us here?" Frank's face hardened. "I'm going to the Lamb for a proper drink and some peace and quiet. Maybe when I come back, you'll have learned to show your father some respect." "What if Lucy doesn't wake up?" Tommy asked desperately. "What if she needs a hospital?" Frank paused in the doorway, and for a moment Tommy thought he saw a flicker of paternal concern cross his father's face. But it was gone so quickly that Tommy might have imagined it. "She'll be fine," Frank repeated. "Children are tougher than people think. She'll wake up with a headache and forget all about this by morning." With that, Frank turned and walked away, leaving Tommy alone with his unconscious sister and his burned hands, and the terrible realization that no one was coming to help them. Tommy listened to his father's footsteps moving through the flat, the slam of drawers as Frank searched for something, probably money for the pub, the rattle of keys, the bang of the front door closing. Then silence, except for the sound of Lucy's shallow breathing and Tommy's own ragged gasps of pain. Tommy forced himself to move, despite the agony radiating from his hands. He stumbled to Lucy's bedside and knelt beside her, studying her pale face with growing alarm. Her breathing was too fast, too shallow, and her skin felt clammy to the touch. The burn on her shoulder looked angry and red, but it was her unconsciousness that terrified Tommy most. "Lucy," he whispered, gently shaking her uninjured shoulder. "Lucy, wake up. Please wake up." But Lucy remained motionless, lost in whatever darkness had claimed her when the pain and fear became too much for her small body to bear. Tommy looked around their destroyed bedroom with growing desperation. The phone in the living room had been disconnected months ago for non-payment. Their neighbors were either too distant or too afraid of Frank to get involved in what they assumed were ordinary domestic disputes. The nearest hospital was 3 miles away through the dark streets of Millbrook. That's when Tommy remembered the mobile phone hidden beneath the floorboard. Moving as carefully as his burned hands would allow, Tommy pried up the loose board and retrieved his precious evidence. The phone's battery showed 31%, enough for an emergency call. But as Tommy stared at the device, a terrible realization struck him. Calling for help would mean exposing everything. The ambulance crew would ask questions. There would be reports, investigations, and Frank's threats about what would happen if Tommy ever told anyone about their family's private business. But looking at Lucy's still form, Tommy realized that Frank's threats no longer mattered. Nothing mattered except getting his sister the help she needed. Tommy's burned. Fingers struggled with the phone's buttons, each touch sending fresh waves of pain through his damaged nerve endings. But he managed to dial the 3 digits that every British child learned in school. 9 to 9. "Emergency services," came the crisp voice of the operator. "Which service do you require?" "Ambulance," Tommy gasped. "Please, I need an ambulance." "My sister. She's hurt. She won't wake up." "All right, love. I'm connecting you now. Stay on the line." The wait felt like hours, though it was probably only seconds. Tommy used the time to study Lucy's condition more carefully, noting the rapid rise and fall of her chest, the way her eyelids fluttered without opening, the angry red mark on her shoulder where the boiling water had caught her. "Ambulance." "Service," came a new voice, male and professionally calm. "What's your emergency?" "My sister," Tommy said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "She's 4 years old, and she won't wake up. She got burned with hot water, and then she collapsed." "I see. Can you tell me your address, please?" Tommy rattled off their address on Coronation Street, his voice getting stronger as he focused on the practical details of getting help for Lucy. "Good lad. Now, can you tell me what happened? How did your sister get burned?" Tommy hesitated, Frank's threats echoing in his memory. But one look at Lucy's pale face made his decision for him. "My da," Tommy said quietly. "My da was angry, and he knocked over a pot of boiling water. It was meant for coffee, but it spilled on us. I got most of it on my hands, but some got Lucy too." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Are you hurt as well, son?" "My hands," Tommy admitted. "They're burned pretty bad, but Lucy's worse. She hit her head when she fell and she won't wake up." "I understand. How old are you?" 8. Another pause. Longer this time. Tommy could hear the sound of typing in the background, probably the operator entering details into a computer system. "Is there an adult with you now?" "No," Tommy said. "My da left. He went to the pub." "I see. Well, listen carefully. I'm sending an ambulance to you right away. They should be there in about 10 minutes. Can you stay on the phone with me until they arrive?" "Yes," Tommy said, though he was beginning to feel lightheaded from pain and shock. "Good. Now, I want you to check your sister's breathing for me. Is her chest moving up and down?" Tommy watched Lucy carefully. "Yes, but it's really fast. Like she's been running." "That's all right. That's normal when someone's unconscious. What about the burn on her shoulder? Can you describe it for me?" Tommy looked at the angry red mark on Lucy's small shoulder. "It's about the size of a 50-pence coin. It's really red, and there's a small blister." "All right. Don't put anything on it. No ice, no butter, nothing like that. Just leave it alone until the paramedics get there. They'll know." "How to treat it properly?" Tommy nodded, though the operator couldn't see him. What about my hands? Can you describe your injuries?" Tommy looked down at his hands, which had swollen to nearly twice their normal size. The skin was an angry red color with white patches where blisters had formed. Just looking at them made the pain worse. "They're really swollen," Tommy said, "and there are blisters everywhere. They hurt so much I can barely hold the phone." "I know it hurts, love, but you're being very brave. The paramedics will give you something for the pain as soon as they arrive." In the distance, Tommy could hear the wail of a siren growing steadily louder. Relief flooded through him so intensely that he nearly dropped the phone. "I can hear them coming," he told the operator. "Excellent. Now, I need you to go to the front door and unlock it so they can get in. Can you do that? Tommy looked at his damaged hands, then at Lucy's unconscious form. Leaving her alone, even for the minute it would take to unlock the door, felt like abandonment. But he knew the paramedics needed to get inside. "I'll be right back," he whispered to Lucy, though she couldn't hear him. Moving as quickly as his injuries allowed, Tommy made his way to the front door. Manipulating the locks with his burned hands sent fresh spikes of agony up his arms, but he managed to get the door open just as the ambulance pulled up outside their building. 2 paramedics emerged from the vehicle, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a younger man who moved with the efficient purpose of someone accustomed to emergencies. They were dressed in dark green uniforms and carried large bags filled with medical equipment. "You must be Tommy," the woman said as they approached the door. "I'm Sarah, and this is Michael. We're here to help you and your sister." Tommy led them through the flat to the bedroom where Lucy lay motionless. Both paramedics took in the scene quickly: the overturned pot, the scattered water on the floor, the small girl unconscious on the bed, and Tommy's obviously damaged. "Hands." "Right then," Sarah said, dropping to her knees beside Lucy's bed. "Let's see what we're dealing with here." She began checking Lucy's vital signs with practiced efficiency, while Michael knelt beside Tommy to examine his hands. The young man's face remained carefully neutral as he assessed the burns, but Tommy caught the quick glance he exchanged with his partner. "These are serious burns, Tommy," Michael said gently. "We're going to need to get you to hospital for proper treatment. But first, let me give you something for the pain." He produced a small canister from his bag and administered a dose of pain relief spray to Tommy's hands. The effect was almost immediate. Not complete relief, but enough of a reduction. In agony that Tommy could think clearly again. "Your sister's stable," Sarah announced from beside Lucy's bed. "Her vital signs are strong, but she has a concussion from hitting her head. We need to get her to hospital for observation." "Is she going to be all right?" Tommy asked, his voice small with worry. "She should be fine," Sarah assured him. "Children are remarkably resilient. But we want to keep an eye on her for the next 24 hours to make sure there are no complications." Michael began carefully wrapping Tommy's hands in sterile bandages while Sarah prepared Lucy for transport. They worked with the kind of smooth coordination that spoke of years of experience dealing with emergencies. "Tommy," Sarah said gently as she secured an oxygen mask over Lucy's face, "can you tell us where your father is? We'll need to contact him about what's happened." Tommy felt a familiar knot of fear form in his stomach. "He went to the Lamb and Flag. That's the pub on Market Street." "I see. And what about your mother?" "She doesn't live with us anymore," Tommy said quietly. "She left a couple of years ago." Sarah and Michael exchanged another look, and Tommy could see questions forming in their minds. He realized that this was the moment of truth, the point where he would either maintain Frank's fiction or tell the authorities what really happened in the Hartwell household. Tommy thought about the mobile phone hidden in his bedroom, still, containing all those hours of recorded evidence. He thought about Frank's threats, about the terrible consequences he had promised if Tommy ever told anyone about their family's private business. But then he looked at Lucy's pale face behind the oxygen mask, and his decision crystallized with perfect clarity. "It wasn't an accident," Tommy said quietly. Both paramedics stopped what they were doing and looked at him with sharp attention. "What do you mean, love?" Sarah asked gently. "The water," Tommy explained, his voice growing stronger. "My da threw it. He was angry about something, and he was shouting at Lucy, and when I tried to protect her, he knocked over the pot. But it wasn't an accident. He was trying to hurt us." Sarah's expression grew very serious. "Tommy, that's a very serious thing to say. Are you absolutely certain about what happened?" Tommy nodded firmly. "I can prove it. I have recordings. My da has been hurting us for months, and I recorded it on a phone I found. The phone is hidden in Lucy's teddy bear." Michael looked around the room until he spotted Mr. Buttons lying beside Lucy's bed. This teddy bear. Yes. There's a secret pocket I made inside him. The phone is in there, with all the recordings. Sarah carefully examined Mr. Buttons and found the hidden compartment Tommy had described. Inside was the battered mobile phone, wrapped in its torn tea towel. She powered on the device and quickly located the audio files Tommy had mentioned. There are 17 recordings here, she said, scanning the file list. Some of them are quite recent. The newest one is from 3 days ago, Tommy said, when my da came home drunk and started threatening to hurt Lucy if she didn't. Stop crying. Sarah selected one of the files and played a brief sample. Frank's voice filled the small bedroom, slurred with alcohol and thick with menace. Stop that sniveling right now, or I'll give you something to really cry about. You think this is bad. You have no idea what bad looks like. The recording continued with sounds of furniture being thrown and Frank's increasingly violent threats about what would happen if either child ever told anyone about their family's private business. Sarah stopped the playback after 30 seconds, her face grim with understanding. Tommy, she said carefully, these recordings, they're going to be very important evidence. We need to make sure they're kept safe. Are you going to arrest my DI? Tommy asked. That's not our decision to make, Michael explained. But we are going to make sure that you and Lucy are safe. The police will need to hear these recordings, and there will probably be people from social services who want to talk to you. Tommy nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and terror. After months of carrying this secret alone, the weight of it was finally being shared with adults who had the power to do something about it. But he also knew that Frank would be furious when he discovered what Tommy had done. What if my da comes back while we're at the hospital? Tommy asked. What if he's angry that I told you? Your father won't be coming near you or Lucy tonight, Sarah said firmly. I'm going to call the police from the ambulance, and they'll be waiting for him when he gets back from the pub. You don't need to worry about him hurting you anymore. As if summoned by her words, the sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs outside reached their ears. Frank's voice carried through the thin walls, singing an off-key rendition of some football chant he had learned at the Lamb and Flag. He was even more drunk than when he had left, and completely unaware that his children's world had changed, forever in his absence. That's him, Tommy whispered, instinctively moving closer to Lucy's bed. Sarah placed a protective hand on Tommy's shoulder while Michael stepped toward the bedroom door. It's all right, Tommy. We're not going to let anything happen to you. The front door banged open, and Frank's voice echoed through the flat. Tommy, where are you, boy? I want to talk to you about showing your old man some proper respect. Footsteps approached. The bedroom door, and Frank appeared in the doorway, swaying drunkenly. His face was flushed with alcohol and exertion, and it took him several seconds to process the scene before him. 2 uniformed paramedics, his unconscious daughter on a stretcher, and his son with heavily bandaged hands. What the hell is going on here? Frank demanded, his voice rising to a shout. Who are you people? What are you doing in my house? Mr. Hartwell, Sarah said, standing to face him with calm authority. I'm a paramedic with the National Health Service. Your children have been injured and require immediate medical attention. Frank's eyes darted between Tommy and Lucy, and Tommy could see his father's mind working to construct a plausible story that would protect him from consequences. It was an accident, Frank said quickly. The kids were playing around with hot water, and there was a spill. I told Tommy to put some ice on it, but I guess it was worse than I thought. That's not what happened, Tommy said quietly, but his voice carried clearly in the small room. Frank's head whipped around to stare at his son with undisguised fury. What did you say? I said that's not what happened, Tommy repeated, his voice growing stronger. I told them the truth. Duh. About the water, about everything. Frank's face went through a series of expressions: shock, rage, and finally, desperate calculation. "He's confused," Frank said to the paramedics. He hit his head. When he fell. Children say all sorts of things when they're hurt and scared. "We have recordings, Mr. Hartwell," Sarah said calmly. "Your son has been documenting the abuse for several months. We've heard your voice threatening both children." The color drained from Frank's face, and for a moment he looked like he might collapse. Then rage reasserted itself, and he took a step toward Tommy with murder in his eyes. "You little bastard," he snarled. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me, by telling lies to strangers." Michael moved smoothly between Frank and Tommy, his stance professional but unmistakably protective. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm going to need you to step back and calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down in my own house," Frank shouted. "These are my children. I'll discipline them however I see fit." "Do actually," came a new voice from the doorway. "That's no longer the case." Two police officers had arrived, a tall woman with graying hair and a younger male constable who looked like he spent considerable time in the gym. They wore the black uniforms of the West Yorkshire Police, and their presence seemed to fill the small bedroom with authority. "Mr. Frank Hartwell?" the female officer asked. "Who wants to know?" Frank replied, though some of the fight seemed to go out of him at the sight of the police. "I'm Sergeant Williams, and this is Constable Parker. We're here about allegations of child abuse against Tommy and Lucy Hartwell." Frank looked wildly around the room, as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. "This is ridiculous," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "These people have no right to come into my home and—" "Actually, we do," Sergeant Williams interrupted. "We've been made aware of evidence suggesting that these children are in immediate danger. We're here to ensure their safety." She turned to Sarah. "How are the children?" "Tommy has second-degree burns on both hands, and Lucy has a concussion and first-degree burns on her shoulder," Sarah reported. "Both children need hospital treatment, and Tommy has provided evidence of ongoing abuse." Sergeant Williams nodded grimly. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm placing you under arrest on suspicion of child abuse and assault." "You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence." Frank's face cycled through a range of emotions. Disbelief, a rage, and finally, desperate pleading. "This is insane," he said, his voice cracking. "They're my children. I love them. I would never hurt them." "The recordings suggest otherwise," Constable Parker said as he produced handcuffs from his belt. As the police began the process of arresting Frank, Tommy felt a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. This was what he had wanted, what he had been building toward with months of secret evidence gathering. But seeing his father reduced to a defeated handcuffed figure also filled him with unexpected grief. Frank was a terrible parent and a dangerous man, but he was still the only father Tommy had ever known. "Tommy," Frank called out as the police led him toward the door. "Tommy, you have to tell them the truth. Tell them I never meant to hurt you. Tell them it was all just accidents." Tommy looked at his father, really looked at him, and saw not the terrifying figure who had dominated his young life, but a broken man whose own pain had twisted him into something monstrous. For the first time, Tommy felt something approaching pity for Frank Hartwell. "I did tell them the truth, Tommy said quietly. "That's why they're here." Frank's face crumpled, and he allowed the police officers to lead him away, without further resistance. Tommy listened to the sound of footsteps receding through the flat, the slam of car doors outside, and the diminishing noise of the police vehicle carrying his father toward whatever consequences awaited him. In the sudden silence that followed, Tommy became aware that Lucy was stirring on her stretcher. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked around with the confused expression of someone waking from a deep sleep. "Tommy?" she whispered, her voice barely audible behind the oxygen mask. "I'm here, sunshine," Tommy said, moving to her side despite the protests from his bandaged hands. I'm right here." Lucy's eyes focused on his face with visible effort, and Tommy could see her trying to process what had happened. Her gaze drifted to his bandaged hands, then to the paramedics moving around their bedroom with purposeful efficiency. "Where's Da?" she asked, her voice muffled by the oxygen mask, but still understandable. Tommy exchanged a glance with Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "He's gone away, Lucy. The police took him away because he hurt us. But it's going to be all right now. We're going to the hospital, and there are people who are going to help us." Lucy's eyes widened with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart," Sarah interjected gently, adjusting the oxygen mask to ensure it fit properly. "You're not in trouble at all. You're very brave children, and everyone is going to make sure you're safe from now on." "What about Mr. Buttons?" Lucy asked, her voice taking on the edge of panic that Tommy recognized as a precursor to one of her episodes. "Where's Mr. Buttons?" Tommy looked around frantically until he spotted the beloved Teddy, bare on the floor where the police had left him after examining the hidden phone. Despite the pain in his hands, Tommy carefully picked up the bear and placed him gently beside Lucy on the stretcher. "He's right here," Tommy assured her. "Mr. Buttons is coming with us to the hospital." Lucy clutched the teddy bear against her chest with her uninjured arm, and some of the tension left her small face. "Is he hurt too?" "No, sunshine. Mr. Buttons is perfectly fine. He was protecting you, just like he always does." Sarah began preparing Lucy for transport, securing the straps on the stretcher and checking all her equipment one final time. "Right then, you two. Time to get you to St. Mary's Hospital. They have doctors there who specialize in helping children, and they're going to take very good care of both of you." As they prepared to leave the bedroom, Tommy took one last look around the space that had been both sanctuary and prison for so much of his young life. The overturned pot still lay on its side near the wall, surrounded by the evidence of Frank's final act of violence. The loose floorboard where he had hidden his secret evidence gaped open like a mouth telling stories that could no longer be contained. Michael gently guided Tommy toward the door. "Come on, lad. Your sister needs you to be strong for just a little while longer." The journey through their flat felt surreal to Tommy. He had spent so many months calculating safe routes through these rooms, memorizing hiding places and escape plans. Now he was walking through them for what might be the last time, flanked by adults whose job was to protect rather than threaten him. As they reached the front door, Tommy turned back for one final look at the place that had shaped his understanding of the world. Despite everything that had happened within these walls, it was still the only home he had ever known. Leaving it meant stepping into an unknown future that both terrified and exhilarated him. "It's all right to be scared," Sarah said, noticing his hesitation. "Change is frightening, even when it's for the better. But you're not alone anymore, Tommy. There are lots of people who are going to help you and Lucy figure out what comes next." The ambulance was waiting outside, its rear doors open to reveal a mobile medical unit filled with equipment and supplies. Other residents of Coronation Street had emerged from their homes, drawn by the unusual activity. Tommy recognized Mrs. Henderson from the flat below theirs, and old Mr. Davies, who ran the corner newsagent. They watched with curious eyes as the paramedics loaded Lucy's stretcher into the ambulance. Tommy climbed into the ambulance beside his sister, marveling at the cleanliness and organization of the medical equipment surrounding them. Everything was white and chrome and sterile, such a stark contrast to the chaos and squalor of their flat. Sarah took her position beside Lucy's stretcher while Michael secured himself in the driver's seat. "First time in an ambulance?" Sarah asked as she began checking Lucy's vital signs again. Tommy nodded, his eyes wide as he took in all the medical equipment. "It's bigger than I thought it would be." "Most people are surprised by that," Sarah said with a smile. "We carry a lot of equipment because we never know what kind of emergency we might encounter. But don't worry about all these machines and monitors. They're just here to help us take care of you and Lucy." The ambulance pulled away from Coronation Street, and Tommy watched through the small rear window as their building receded into the distance. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he realized that this was likely the end of one chapter of his life and the beginning of something entirely different. As they drove through the dark streets of Millbrook, Sarah continued monitoring Lucy's condition while keeping up a gentle stream of conversation designed to keep both children calm and alert. "Tommy," she said, "the doctors at the hospital are going to want to ask you some questions about what happened tonight. They're also going to want to examine your injuries and Lucy's very carefully. It might feel a bit overwhelming, but everyone there has experience helping children who have been through difficult situations." "What's going to happen to us?" Tommy asked, voicing the question that had been weighing on his mind since the police arrested Frank. "Where are we going to live?" "That's not for me to decide," Sarah said honestly. "But there are social workers, people whose job is to find safe places for children to live when their homes aren't safe anymore. They'll work very hard to make sure you and Lucy stay together and that you're placed with people who will take good care of you." Tommy felt a mixture of relief and anxiety at this news. The idea of staying with Lucy was paramount. He couldn't imagine being separated from the sister he had protected for so long. But the thought of living with strangers, of having to learn new rules and expectations, was daunting. "Will they believe us?" Tommy asked. "About what Da did?" "Oh, yes," Sarah said firmly. "Your recordings provide very clear evidence of what's been happening. Plus, your injuries and Lucy's tell their own story. No one is going to doubt what you've been through." The ambulance turned onto the main road leading to St. Mary's Hospital, and Tommy could see the building in the distance, a large, modern structure with brightly lit emergency department bays and a tall tower marked with a red cross. Even at this late hour, the hospital hummed with activity, people coming and going under the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency entrance. "Lucy," Sarah said gently, "we're almost at the hospital. How are you feeling?" Lucy had been drifting in and out of consciousness during the ride, but her eyes opened at the sound of her name. "My head hurts," she said quietly. "And my shoulder." "I know, sweetheart. The doctors are going to give you some medicine to help with the pain, and they're going to check your head very carefully to make sure everything is working properly." As the ambulance pulled into the emergency bay, Tommy could see medical staff already waiting for them. A doctor in blue scrubs stood beside a nurse with a wheelchair, both of them moving with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to dealing with emergency situations. The rear doors of the ambulance opened, and suddenly their small, self-contained world was flooded with bright lights and the controlled chaos of a busy emergency department. Sarah immediately began briefing the waiting medical team as they transferred Lucy's stretcher from the ambulance to a hospital gurney. 4-year-old female, unconscious for approximately 90 minutes following head trauma and first-degree burns to the left shoulder, Sarah reported in the clipped, professional language of medical emergencies. 8-year-old male with second-degree burns to both hands. Both children victims of domestic abuse with documented evidence. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, immediately took charge of the situation. "I'm Dr. Morrison," she said, addressing both children. "We're going to take very good care of you both. Tommy, I want you to come with us while we examine Lucy. You can stay right beside her." As they wheeled Lucy through the automatic doors of the emergency department, Tommy was struck by the sheer scale and activity of the hospital. Doctors and nurses moved purposefully between treatment bays, their conversations filled with medical terminology that sounded like a foreign language. Machines beeped and hummed with electronic efficiency, monitoring the vital signs of patients throughout the department. But despite the overwhelming nature of the environment, Tommy felt something he hadn't experienced in months: safety. These people weren't going to hurt him or Lucy. Their job was to heal, to protect, to make things better. For the first time since their mother had walked out 2 years ago, Tommy felt like he could stop being the sole guardian of his sister's welfare. Dr. Morrison led them to a private treatment room where she could examine both children away from the bustle of the main emergency department. The room was painted in soft colors that were probably meant to be soothing, with cartoon characters on the walls and child-sized furniture mixed in with the medical equipment. "Right then," Dr. Morrison said, settling onto a stool beside Lucy's bed. "Let's see what we're dealing with here." She began a thorough examination of Lucy's injuries, explaining each step in language that both children could understand. Her touch was gentle but thorough, and she maintained a running commentary designed to keep Lucy calm and alert. "The burn on your shoulder isn't too serious," she told Lucy. "It's going to hurt for a few days, but it should heal very nicely with proper care. The bump on your head is a bit more concerning, though. I want to do some tests to make sure everything is working properly up there." She turned to Tommy next, carefully unwrapping the bandages Michael had applied in their flat. Tommy tried not to look at his hands as the dressings were removed, but he couldn't help seeing the angry red skin and the blisters that had formed across his palms and fingers. "These are serious burns, Tommy," Dr. Morrison said gently. "They're going to take several weeks to heal properly, and you'll need to be very careful about keeping them clean and dry. But the good news is that there shouldn't be any permanent damage if we take proper care of them." As she worked, Dr. Morrison asked gentle questions about what had happened, how they were feeling, and whether they had any other injuries that might not be immediately visible. Her manner was professional but warm, and Tommy found himself relaxing despite the pain in his hands and the uncertainty about their future. "Tommy," Dr. Morrison said as she began applying fresh bandages to his hands, "the police have asked to speak with you about what happened tonight. There's also a social worker here who specializes in helping children in situations like yours. Are you feeling up to talking with them?" Tommy looked at Lucy, who was resting quietly with Mr. Buttons tucked against her uninjured side. His sister's eyes were clearer now, and the color was returning to her pale cheeks. She seemed stable and safe, surrounded by people whose job was to protect her. "Will Lucy be all right while I'm talking to them?" Tommy asked. "Absolutely," and Dr. Morrison assured him. "Nurse Catherine will stay with her the entire time, and will just be in the next room. You can check on her whenever you need to." Tommy nodded, feeling ready to take the next step in their journey towards safety. "I want to tell them everything. About the recordings, about what Da did to us, about everything." "That's very brave," Dr. Morrison said, "and very important. The more honest you can be about what happened, the better equipped everyone will be to help you and Lucy." As Dr. Morrison led Tommy toward the door, he paused to squeeze Lucy's uninjured hand. "I'll be right back, sunshine," he promised. "And when I'm done talking to the police, we'll figure out what happens next. Together." Lucy smiled at him, the first genuine smile he had seen from her since before their ordeal began. "Will you tell them about the castle, about how the dragon protects the princess?" "I'll tell them everything," Tommy said, "including how brave Princess Lucy was when the dragon was fighting the monster." Dr. Morrison opened the door to reveal a small conference room where two adults were waiting. One was Sergeant Williams, whom Tommy recognized from their flat. The other was a woman in her 50s with short silver hair and a warm smile, dressed in casual clothes rather than a uniform. "Tommy," Sergeant Williams said, "this is Mrs. Patricia Chen. She's a social worker with the local authority, and she's here to help you and Lucy figure out what happens next." Mrs. Chen stood and extended her hand in greeting. "Hello, Tommy. I've heard that you've been very brave tonight. I'm here to make sure that you and your sister are safe and that you have everything you need." Tommy shook her hand carefully, mindful of his bandaged fingers. There was something immediately trustworthy about Mrs. Chen, a combination of professional competence and genuine warmth that reminded him of the teachers he had liked best at school. "Please, sit down," she said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from her own. I know this has been a very difficult night for you, but I want you to know that the hardest part is over. From now on, our job is to help you heal and to find you and Lucy a safe place to live." As Tommy settled into the chair, he realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't responsible for managing a crisis or protecting his sister from immediate danger. Adults were handling the situation, competent, caring adults whose job was to help rather than harm. The weight of that realization was overwhelming in the best possible way. Tommy had been carrying the burden of his and Lucy's survival for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to simply be a child who could trust that adults would take care of the important decisions. "Now then," Sergeant Williams said, settling into her own chair with a digital recorder and a notebook. "Why don't you start at the beginning and tell us everything about what happened tonight?" Tommy took a deep breath, thinking about the castle in his stories where brave knights protected princesses from dragons, and everyone lived safely ever after. Tonight, he realized, they had finally found their way to that castle. The real world version might not have towers and flags and friendly dragons, but it had doctors and police officers and social workers who understood that children deserved to be safe and loved. "It started when my da came home from the pub," Tommy began, his voice steady and clear. He was angrier than usual, and he started shouting about the rent money and how everything was our fault. As he began to tell his story, the complete, unvarnished truth about their life with Frank Hartwell, Tommy felt the last pieces of his childhood burden finally lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in 2 years, someone else was taking responsibility for his and Lucy's welfare, and the nightmare was over. The healing could begin. 3 weeks had passed since the night that changed everything for Tommy and Lucy Hartwell. The hospital room on the pediatric ward of St. Mary's had become their temporary sanctuary, a space painted in soft yellows and greens, with windows that looked out over Millbrook's rooftops toward the distant hills that marked the edge of their troubled town. Tommy sat in the visitor's chair beside Lucy's bed, carefully turning the pages of a picture book with his healing hands. The angry red burns had faded to pink patches of new skin, and while his fingers remained stiff and sensitive, Dr. Morrison had declared his recovery remarkable. Lucy, meanwhile, had bounced back with the resilience that seemed to be built into children's bones. Her concussion had healed completely, leaving only a small scar on her shoulder as a reminder of their ordeal. And so the brave knight and the princess lived happily ever after in their beautiful castle, Tommy concluded, closing the book they had been reading together. "But what about the dragon?" Lucy asked, as she always did when this particular story reached its end. "Does the dragon get to live in the castle too?" "Of course," Tommy said, smiling at his sister's predictable question. "The dragon was the one who protected them, remember? He gets the best tower in the whole castle, with a perfect view of the kingdom so he can watch for any trouble." Lucy nodded with satisfaction, clutching Mr. Buttons against her chest. The beloved teddy bear had been returned to her after the police finished examining the hidden phone compartment. Though the secret pocket remained empty now, the recordings that had provided crucial evidence against Frank were safely stored in police files, no longer needed as proof but preserved as a permanent record of what they had endured. A gentle knock on the door interrupted their quiet morning. Routine. Mrs. Patricia Chen entered with her characteristic warm smile, carrying a folder of documents and wearing the kind of professional attire that somehow managed to look both official and approachable. "Good morning, you two," she said, settling into the second visitor's chair that had become her regular spot during their extended hospital stay. "How are we feeling today?" "Lucy's reading is getting much better," Tommy reported proudly. "And she can recognize almost all her letters now, and she's starting to sound out simple words." "That's wonderful news," Mrs. Chen said, directing her smile toward Lucy. "And how are your hands feeling, Tommy? Any pain today?" Tommy flexed his fingers experimentally, marveling at how much mobility he had regained in just 3 weeks. "They're much better. Dr. Morrison says I might be able to start writing properly again next week." "Excellent." Mrs. Chen opened her folder and withdrew several official-looking documents. I have some very good news for both of you. The paperwork has been finalized, and we've found you a wonderful family to live with. Tommy felt his heart skip with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Over the past 3 weeks, Mrs. Chen had explained the foster care process in detail, preparing them for the possibility of living with a family who specialized in caring for children who had experienced trauma. But hearing that it was actually happening still felt surreal. "Tell us about them," Tommy said, unconsciously reaching for Lucy's hand. "Their names are James and Margaret Chen. And yes, Chen is my surname too, though we're not related," Mrs. Chen said with a chuckle. "It's quite common in Chinese families. James and Margaret have been foster parents for 15 years, and they've helped dozens of children transition to safe, permanent homes. They live in a lovely house in Bramley's, about 20 minutes from here." She showed them photographs of a modest 2-story house with a garden full of flowers and a wooden swing hanging from an old oak tree. The house looked like something from one of Tommy's storybooks, the kind of place where families gathered for Sunday dinners and children played safely in backyards, surrounded by love rather than fear. They have 2 grown children of their own who live in London now, Mrs. Chen continued. But they've continued fostering because they believe every child deserves a safe home where they can heal and grow. They're particularly experienced with siblings who need to stay together. Lucy leaned forward to study the photographs more carefully. "Is that really going to be our house?" "If you'd like it to be," Mrs. Chen said gently. "James and Margaret are very excited to meet you both. They've set up a beautiful bedroom for you to share, with twin beds and shelves for all your books and toys." Tommy studied the photographs, trying to imagine himself and Lucy living in such a place. The house looked so normal, so peaceful. It was difficult to believe that they might actually be allowed to call it home. "What are they like?" Tommy asked. "The Chens, I mean." "Margaret is a retired teacher who specializes in helping children with reading difficulties," Mrs. Chen explained. "She's very patient and kind, and she loves telling stories. James is a gardener who works for the local council maintaining parks and green spaces. He's quiet and gentle, and he has a wonderful way with children who have been through difficult experiences." She produced more photographs showing the Chens themselves, a couple in their early 60s with warm smiles and kind eyes. Margaret had silver hair cut in a practical bob and wore colorful cardigans that made her look like the sort of grandmother every child should have. James was tall and lean, with weathered hands that spoke of years working outdoors, and his smile had the genuine quality of someone who found joy in simple pleasures. "They look nice," Lucy said quietly. "Do they have any pets?" "They have a very old, very lazy cat named Biscuit," Mrs. Chen said. "He's orange and white, and his favorite activities are sleeping in sunny spots and purring when children read to him." The mention of a cat brought the first genuine smile Tommy had seen on Lucy's face since before their ordeal began. She had always loved animals, though Frank had never allowed pets in their flat. "When would we go there?" Tommy asked, though he wasn't sure if he was ready for such a momentous change. "That depends on you," Mrs. Chen said. "Dr. Morrison says you're both healthy enough to be discharged whenever you feel ready. We could arrange for you to visit the Chens this afternoon, just to meet them and see the house. If you feel comfortable, you could stay for dinner, and if everything goes well, you could spend the night and see how it feels." Tommy looked at Lucy, reading the mixture of hope and anxiety in her pale blue eyes. For 3 weeks, this hospital room had been their entire world. Safe, predictable, insulated from the chaos that had defined their previous existence. Leaving meant stepping into the unknown, trusting strangers with their fragile sense of security. But it also meant the possibility of something better. A real home with people who chose to care for children, not because they were obligated to, but because they wanted to. A place where Lucy could play with a cat named Biscuit, and Tommy could focus on being 8 years old instead of serving as his sister's primary protector. "I think we'd like to meet them," Tommy said finally. "Don't we, Lucy?" Lucy nodded, though she kept Mr. Buttons clutched tightly against her chest. "Can Mr. Buttons come too?" "Of course," Mrs. Chen said. "The Chens understand. How important special things are to children. Mr. Buttons will always have a place in your new home." A few hours later, Tommy and Lucy found themselves in the back seat of Mrs. Chen's car, driving through streets they had never seen before. The neighborhoods grew progressively more suburban as they moved away from Millbrook's industrial center, the terraced houses giving way to semi-detached homes with proper gardens and trees lining the pavements. Bramley was a different world from the gritty urban landscape they had known all their lives. Here, children played on well-maintained playgrounds while their parents watched from nearby benches. Gardens bloomed with flowers that served no purpose beyond beauty, and the air smelled of cut grass rather than factory smoke. "It's very quiet here," Lucy observed, pressing her face against the car window. "Peaceful," Mrs. Chen corrected, gently. "That's what we call it when places are quiet in a good way. Peaceful means safe and calm, rather than just empty." The Chen house was exactly as it had appeared in the photographs, but somehow more welcoming in person. The garden was clearly tended by someone who understood that plants, like children, thrived with patient attention and gentle care. The front door was painted bright blue, and window boxes overflowed with trailing flowers that added splashes of color to the cream-colored walls. Before they had even reached the front steps, the door opened to reveal Margaret Chen. She was shorter than Tommy had expected, barely taller than he was himself, but her smile was enormous and genuine. She wore a lavender cardigan over dark trousers, and her silver hair caught the afternoon sunlight like spun metal. "Tommy and Lucy," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of distant origins but decades of English life. "We're so very pleased to meet you both." James Chen appeared beside his wife, wiping soil from his hands with a small towel. He was indeed tall and lean, with kind brown eyes and the sort of deep tan that came from years of outdoor work. His handshake was gentle but firm when he greeted Tommy, and he knelt down to Lucy's eye level when he spoke to her. "I was just working in the back garden," he told Lucy. "Would you like to see what I'm growing? I have carrots and tomatoes. And there's a special patch where children can plant their own flowers if they want to." Lucy looked to Tommy for permission, a habit so ingrained that it would probably take months to overcome. Tommy nodded encouragingly, and she managed a small smile for James. "I've never grown anything before," she admitted. "Then you're in for a wonderful adventure," James said. "Plants are very forgiving teachers. They show you exactly what they need, and they reward your care with beautiful flowers or delicious vegetables." Margaret led them into the house, which managed to feel both spacious and cozy at the same time. The hallway was lined with photographs, not formal, family portraits, but casual snapshots of children and adults laughing, playing, celebrating birthdays and holidays. Tommy realized these must be pictures of all the foster children who had lived here over the years. "Every child who stays with us becomes part of our family history," Margaret explained, noticing Tommy's interest in the photographs. "We believe that everyone deserves to have their happiness remembered and celebrated." The living room was furnished with comfortable sofas and chairs arranged around a fireplace that showed evidence of regular use. Bookshelves lined the walls, and filled with novels, picture books, gardening manuals, and photo albums. It was the sort of room designed for reading quietly, playing board games, or simply talking about the day's events. And there, sprawled across the back of the sofa in a patch of sunlight, was the largest, most content-looking cat Tommy had ever seen. Biscuit was indeed orange and white, with a magnificent fluffy tail and green eyes that opened lazily as the visitors entered. "Oh," Lucy breathed, her eyes widening with delight. "He's beautiful." "He's also very friendly," Margaret said. "Would you like to pet him? He loves meeting new people, especially children who are gentle with animals." Lucy approached the cat cautiously, still clutching Mr. Buttons in one arm while extending her free hand toward Biscuit. The cat sniffed her fingers delicately, and then began purring with a sound like a small motor running. When Lucy gently stroked his orange fur, Biscuit's purr intensified, and he rubbed his head against her hand with obvious affection. "He likes you," James observed. "Biscuit is an excellent judge of character. If he approves of someone, we know they must be special." Tommy watched his sister's face light up with genuine joy for the first time since their ordeal began. The sight of Lucy laughing as Biscuit nuzzled her cheek was worth more than all the medical care and professional counseling they had received at the hospital. "Would you like to see your room?" Margaret asked gently. We've prepared a space especially for you both, though you can change anything you don't like." They climbed a staircase lined with more photographs and family memories, reaching a landing that led to several bedrooms. Margaret opened the door to a room that took Tommy's breath away with its simple perfection. Twin beds were positioned against opposite walls, each covered with colorful quilts that looked handmade. Between the beds stood a shared nightstand, with a reading lamp and space for books and personal belongings. Along one wall, built-in shelves waited to be filled with toys, games, and treasures. A large window looked out over the back garden, where James's vegetables grew in neat rows and flowers bloomed in carefully tended beds. "The purple bed is for Lucy, and the blue one is for Tommy," Margaret explained. "But if you'd prefer different colors, we can easily change the bedding." Lucy walked slowly around the room, touching surfaces and examining details with the careful attention of someone who had never been invited to claim a space as her own. She stopped at the window and gazed out at the garden, where butterflies danced among the flowers and birds splashed in a small fountain. "It's like the castle," she whispered to Tommy, "like the one in our stories." Tommy joined her at the window, studying the peaceful scene beyond the glass. The garden was indeed reminiscent of the magical kingdom he had created in his tales, a place where beautiful things were allowed to grow and flourish, where gentleness was valued over strength, and where children could play without fear. "Oh, would you like to stay for dinner?" Margaret asked. "Nothing fancy, just shepherd's pie and vegetables from James's garden. And afterward, if you're feeling comfortable, you could spend the night and see how it feels to sleep in proper beds with clean sheets and warm blankets." Tommy looked at Lucy, reading the hope and uncertainty warring in her expression. They had been living in survival mode for so long that the concept of comfort seemed almost foreign. But they had to start somewhere, and this house filled with gentle people, and afternoon sunlight seemed like a good beginning. "We'd like that very much," Tommy said. The evening that followed felt like a dream to both children. Dinner was served in a kitchen that smelled of herbs and fresh bread, with conversation that centered on gentle questions about their interests, and favorite foods rather than interrogations about their traumatic past. James told stories about the various plants in his garden, while Margaret shared tales from her years as a teacher working with children who struggled with reading. "Learning happens at different speeds for different people," she explained when Tommy mentioned his love of books. "Some children read early, others need more time, but everyone has their own special way of understanding the world. And that's what makes teaching so wonderful." After dinner, they gathered in the living room, where Margaret read aloud from a collection of fairy tales while Biscuit purred contentedly on Lucy's lap. The stories were familiar, tales of brave children overcoming difficulties, of kindness triumphing over cruelty, of families formed by choice rather than obligation. As bedtime approached, Margaret helped both children with their nightly routines. There were proper toothbrushes waiting in the bathroom, along with child-sized towels and gentle soap that smelled of lavender. Tommy marveled at the simple luxury of hot water that ran clear and clean, of towels that were soft and dry, of a bathroom that was warm and well lit. "If you need anything during the night," Margaret explained as she tucked them into their respective beds, "our room is just down the hall. Don't hesitate to wake us if you're frightened or uncomfortable. We're here to help, not to judge." She left a small lamp burning on the nightstand between their beds, understanding that children who had lived in fear often needed light to feel safe in unfamiliar surroundings. For the first time in years, Tommy fell asleep without listening for footsteps in the hallway or calculating escape routes from his bedroom. The house was quiet in the way that peaceful places are quiet, not empty or threatening, but full of gentle sounds that spoke of safety and care. Somewhere downstairs, a clock ticked steadily. Outside, night birds called softly to each other across the garden. These were the sounds of a home where children were protected rather than endangered. Tommy woke once during the night, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. But instead of the familiar spike of fear that usually accompanied such awakenings, he felt only curiosity and mild wonder. Lucy slept peacefully in the bed across from his, her breathing deep and regular. Mr. Buttons nestled safely in her arms. Through the window, Tommy could see stars scattered across a clear sky, something that had been impossible to observe from their old flat, where streetlights and industrial glare blocked out the celestial display. He lay quietly for several minutes, watching the distant lights and thinking about the remarkable turn their lives had taken. 3 weeks ago, he had been a terrified 8-year-old boy responsible for protecting his sister from an increasingly dangerous father. Tonight, he was simply a child sleeping safely in a warm bed, cared for by adults whose job was to nurture rather than threaten. When morning came, it arrived with the smell of cooking breakfast and the sound of gentle voices discussing the day ahead. Tommy woke to find Lucy already sitting up in her bed, looking around the sunlit room with an expression of wonder. "Tommy," she whispered, "do you think this is real? Do you think we really get to stay here?" "I think so," Tommy replied, though part of him still struggled to believe in such good fortune. "Mrs. Chen said that if we liked it here, and if the Chens liked having us, we could stay for as long as we needed." A gentle knock on their door interrupted their quiet conversation. Margaret appeared with 2 cups of warm chocolate and news that James was making pancakes for breakfast. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, settling into the chair by their window. "Very well," Tommy said truthfully. "The beds are very comfortable." "And it's so quiet here," Lucy added. "Not scary quiet, but nice quiet." Margaret smiled at Lucy's distinction. "That's exactly right, sweetheart. Nice quiet means you're safe and peaceful. We want this house to always feel like a sanctuary for the children who live here." Over breakfast, fluffy pancakes topped with strawberries from James's garden, they discussed the practical aspects of their potential long-term stay. There would be enrollment in the local school, where Margaret had connections among the teaching staff who were experienced in helping children who had faced difficult circumstances. There would be regular visits with counselors who specialized in trauma recovery, though these sessions would focus on healing rather than repeated examinations of their painful past. "We believe in looking forward rather than constantly revisiting what's behind us," James explained. "Yes, you've been through terrible experiences, but now you have the chance to discover who you really are when you're safe and loved and free to be children." "What about our day?" Lucy asked quietly. "Will he come looking for us?" Margaret and James exchanged a glance before Margaret answered with gentle honesty. "Your father is in prison, Lucy. The recordings that Tommy made provided very clear evidence of how he treated you both. He won't be able to come near you for a very long time, and when he's eventually released, there will be legal protections in place to ensure he can't contact you unless you specifically choose to allow it." Tommy felt a complex mixture of relief and sadness at this news. Frank had been a monster, but he had also been the only father Tommy had ever known. The finality of their separation felt both liberating and melancholy. "You don't have to decide how you feel about your father right now," James said, seeming to understand Tommy's conflicted emotions. "Those are complicated feelings that will probably change as you grow older. What's important now is that you're safe to feel whatever you feel without having to worry about protecting yourselves or each other." After breakfast, Mrs. Chen arrived to check on their progress and discuss the next steps in their placement. She found both children helping James in the garden, Lucy carefully watering seedlings, while Tommy learned to identify different plants by their leaves. "You both look remarkably settled," she observed with satisfaction. "How was your first night?" "Wonderful," Lucy said without hesitation. "Biscuit slept on my bed, and I could see stars from our window." "And you, Tommy?" Mrs. Chen asked. "How are you feeling about the possibility of making this your permanent home?" Tommy considered the question carefully. The concept of permanence still felt foreign after years of uncertainty and fear. But looking around the garden, where James patiently answered Lucy's questions about soil and seeds, watching Margaret hang colorful laundry on a line strung between apple trees, observing the easy rhythm of a household built on kindness rather than chaos, he felt something that might have been hope taking root in his chest. "I think we'd like to stay," he said quietly. "If they'll have us." Margaret, who had been listening from nearby, smiled with genuine joy. "Oh, Tommy, we would be honored to have you both as part of our family, for as long as you need us, and hopefully for much longer than that." Over the following weeks, the children began the gradual process of settling into their new life. Tommy enrolled in Year 4 at Bramley Primary School, where his teacher, Mr. Williams, had been briefed on his background and understood the importance of patience and encouragement. Lucy started attending a nursery class where she could interact with other children her age while continuing to develop her reading and social skills. Both children began weekly sessions with a counselor named Dr. Sarah Elizabeth, not to be confused with Sarah the paramedic, they noted with amusement. Dr. Elizabeth specialized in helping children process trauma through play therapy and art, allowing them to explore their experiences without the pressure of verbal analysis. Tommy discovered that he had a remarkable talent for drawing. His sketches of the garden, of Biscuit sleeping in various sunny spots, of Lucy playing with her new friends, captured not just visual details but emotional truths. Dr. Elizabeth encouraged him to create a visual diary of his healing process, documenting the gradual transformation from fear to security. Lucy, meanwhile, began to bloom like one of James's carefully tended flowers. Her vocabulary expanded rapidly as Margaret read to her each evening, and her natural curiosity about the world emerged as she felt safe to ask questions and explore her environment. The selective mutism that had characterized her final months with Frank gradually disappeared, replaced by the normal chatter of a 4-year-old who felt heard and valued. 3 months after their placement with the Chens, Mrs. Patricia Chen, who had become a regular visitor and friend to the family, brought news that would change their lives forever. "James and Margaret have submitted an application to adopt you both," she announced during one of her routine visits. "And the process will take several months to complete, but all the initial assessments have been extremely positive." Tommy felt his heart skip with a combination of joy and disbelief. "Adopt? You mean permanently, forever?" "Forever and always," Margaret confirmed, reaching over to squeeze his hand gently. "We love you both very much, and we want you to be our children officially, not just in our hearts." Lucy looked up from where she had been playing with Biscuit on. "The living room carpet? Does that mean you'll be our mummy and daddy?" "If you'd like us to be," James said softly. "We know you had a mother and father before, and we're not trying to replace those relationships. But we'd be honored to be your parents from now on by, to love you and care for you and help you grow into the amazing people you're meant to become." The adoption process proved to be lengthy but thorough, involving multiple interviews, home visits, and assessments designed to ensure that the placement was truly in the children's best interests. Tommy and Lucy met with judges and social workers, answered questions about their feelings and preferences, and gradually came to understand that they were not just being placed in care, but were actually being chosen to become part of a real family. Frank's parental rights were formally terminated as part of the process, a legal step that felt both necessary and final. Tommy learned that his father had been sentenced to 4 years in prison for child abuse and assault, with additional requirements for alcohol treatment and anger management. before he could be considered for any form of supervised contact with his children, something that would only occur if Tommy and Lucy specifically requested it when they were old enough to make such decisions. The knowledge that Frank was permanently out of their lives brought Tommy a sense of closure he hadn't expected. For so long, he had been defined by his role as Lucy's protector against their father's violence. Now, for the first time, he was free to discover who he was when he wasn't constantly afraid. The formal adoption hearing took place on a gray December morning, 6 months after their placement with the Chens. Tommy wore his first proper suit, dark blue with a tie that James had taught him to knot himself. Lucy was dressed in a purple, velvet dress that Margaret had sewn specially for the occasion, complete with a matching hairband that held her golden curls away from her face. The courthouse was intimidating with its high ceilings and formal atmosphere, but Judge Patricia Walsh proved to be a kind woman with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She spoke directly to both children, asking them about their feelings regarding the adoption and ensuring they understood the permanence of the decision being made. "Tommy and Lucy," she said formally, "after reviewing all the evidence and assessments, it is clear that James and Margaret Chen have provided you with a loving, stable home where you can heal and thrive. It is my great pleasure to grant this adoption petition and to declare that you are now legally and permanently the children of James and Margaret Chen." The gavel fell with a sound that seemed to echo through the years of uncertainty and fear, officially marking the end of one chapter of their lives and the beginning of another. Tommy felt tears streaming down his face, not tears of sadness or fear, but tears of joy and relief so profound that his small body could barely contain them. Lucy launched herself into Margaret's arms with a cry of pure happiness, while James placed a gentle hand on Tommy's shoulder in a gesture that conveyed pride, love, and the promise of protection that would never be withdrawn. That evening, they celebrated with a family dinner that included all the traditions Margaret and James had established over their years of fostering. There was a special cake decorated with flowers from their garden, photographs to commemorate the occasion, and the ritual of adding Tommy and Lucy's official adoption certificates to the family document folder that would preserve this moment for future generations. As they sat around the dinner table, their forever table in their forever home, Tommy looked at the faces surrounding him and marveled at the transformation their lives had undergone. 6 months ago, he had been a terrified child carrying the impossible burden of protecting his sister from violence and neglect. Tonight, he was simply an 8-year-old boy who was loved unconditionally by parents who had chosen him. "What are you thinking about?" Margaret asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "I was remembering the stories I used to tell Lucy," Tommy said, "about the castle where the princess lived with the knight and the friendly dragon, who protected them from all the bad things in the world." "And?" James prompted gently. Tommy smiled, reaching over to squeeze Lucy's hand. "And I think we found our castle after all. It just looks different than I imagined. Better, somehow. More real." Lucy giggled, her face bright with contentment. "And we have the best dragon ever," she said, looking meaningfully at Biscuit, who was sprawled beneath the table hoping for dropped morsels. "He's orange and fluffy and he purrs." Margaret and James laughed, and the sound filled their home with the warmth that comes from genuine happiness shared among people who choose to love each other. Outside, snow began to fall on the garden, where spring bulbs lay sleeping beneath the soil, waiting for their turn to bloom. Inside, 2 children who had once lived in fear discovered what it meant to be safe, loved, and free to dream about futures filled with possibility rather than survival. That night, as Tommy tucked Lucy into her purple bed and settled into his own blue one, he realized that he no longer lay awake listening for footsteps in the hallway or calculating escape routes. Instead, he fell asleep to the sound of Margaret and James talking quietly downstairs about ordinary things like grocery lists and garden planning, the comfortable domestic conversations of people who built lives based on love rather than fear. For the first time in his young life, Tommy's dreams were filled not with nightmares of violence and danger, but with images of the future. Lucy starting proper school, family holidays by the seaside, Christmas mornings with presents under a tree, birthdays celebrated with cake and candles, and the certain knowledge that he was valued simply for existing. The boy who had once hidden recordings of abuse in his sister's teddy bear now slept peacefully in a house where the only sounds in the darkness were the gentle ones of a family at rest. The settling of timber, the whisper of wind through tree branches, the soft footsteps of a cat padding through hallways where children were treasured rather than threatened. Tommy and Lucy Hartwell had found their way home at last. Not to the place where they had been born, but to the place where they belonged, surrounded by people who understood that every child deserves to be safe, loved, and free to discover the amazing people they were meant to become. In the months and years that followed, the Hartwell-Chen family would face the normal challenges that all families encounter: scraped knees and hurt feelings, disagreements over bedtimes and vegetables, the complex navigation of growing up and growing together. But they would face these challenges from a foundation of love and security that could weather any storm. Tommy would grow into a young man with a gift for art and storytelling, using his talents to help other children who had faced trauma. Lucy would become a bright, confident girl with a love of animals and growing things, carrying forward the nurturing she had received into her own relationships with the world. And in a house in Bramley where flowers bloomed in carefully tended gardens and a cat named Biscuit supervised afternoon reading sessions, two children who had once lived in fear discovered that the most powerful magic in the world was not found in fairy tales, but in the simple truth that every child deserves to be loved, protected, and given the chance to write their own happy ending.